to you, Sarah. Lovely. Thank you very much, Mike. And thank you to the North Canberra Community Council for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. I wasn't going to speak for particularly long, maybe about 15 minutes or so, and then be very happy to answer any questions that anyone has in relation to what I'm speaking about tonight, or indeed more broadly. But tonight I've been asked to speak to you about a broad range, I guess a fairly broad-ranging ambit around Canberra's sustainability journey, and that was my suggestion to the committee of the North Canberra Community Council. So that's what I'm going to try and give you, I guess, a big picture on tonight. Perhaps to start with, I think it's really important that we think about our city, our community, our society in a context which is a critical one for everybody, and that is a city and a society that is growing prosperous, largely through the easy availability of cheap carbon-based energy. And we have built our prosperity as a nation, as an economy, for over a century on our reliance on cheap, readily available, but very polluting energy sources. And we know globally what this is doing to our planet and what it means, not just globally, but what it means at a national level and indeed at a local level. Locally, what we know it means is that a continuation of business as usual in terms of our cities and our nations and indeed the globe's greenhouse gas emissions is we're tracking towards a +4-degree world, which is well beyond the safe boundaries that have been recognised extensively now by the overwhelming majority of scientists as being a critical change in global climate to one which is far more difficult for humanity and indeed for established ecosystems to live in a prosperous, safe and settled manner. So, as a community, we need to respond to that challenge, and here in the ACT, we very much are responding to that, recognising that cities are one of the key contributors to greenhouse gas emissions globally, and that cities individually across the world, and we're talking hundreds and hundreds of cities, large and small across the world now, are responding to this challenge by adopting smart growth policies, adopting policies that shift to a low carbon future, adopting policies that respond not just to the environmental imperative, but also respond to the economic opportunity that transformation of the energy sector, the change in the operation of our economic markets is creating, the opportunities that are being created from that transition to a low carbon future. So here in the ACT, we're very much part of that global trend, and my job as Minister for the Environment is to help shape the policies, the programs and the activities that help our city make that transition and remain as a sustainable, remain a prosperous and remain an innovative place for people to live, work and enjoy the benefits of Canberra. So how are we doing that here in the ACT? Well, first and foremost, it's driven by a very strong legislative framework around greenhouse gas emission reduction. We have a 40% emission reduction target by the year 2020, and in practical terms that means about, instead of about 4 million tonnes of carbon per annum being emitted economy-wide across the ACT, we want to get that down to 2 million tonnes per annum. That's the practical impact of that 40% reduction target. And how are we going to do that? The government set out very comprehensive policies in our Action Plan 2 document, which highlights how this is to be achieved. First of all, focusing on things like using energy smarter. So helping people to reduce their household electricity bills by making sure that energy companies like Actu-AGL are required to provide free or discounted energy saving devices and installations into people's people's homes to save them money on their electricity bills, and at the same time reduce demand on electricity consumption. And we know that's working. The most recent greenhouse gas inventory report commissioned by the government shows an 8% reduction. An 8% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions over the last 2 years in Canberra, and that's a combination of two factors. One is reduced energy use, as people are using energy in smarter and more efficient ways, and the second is through a switch to renewable energy sources as an alternative to coal or gas-fired energy generation. So that leads me, I guess, to the next response, which is supporting the uptake of large-scale renewable energy generation. And here, the ACT really is leading the nation in supporting the development of large-scale renewable energy generation. We've got Australia's now second largest, it was the largest for a little while, but now the second largest solar PV plant in the country on the Monaro Highway down at Royalla, which has been supported by ACT laws that encourage the development of these facilities by paying a competitively priced feed-in tariff mechanism for large-scale generation. We will have 3 large-scale solar farms up and running in the next couple of years, including the one that's already operating. And we will also shortly see the start of work on the first of 3 large-scale wind generation facilities that, combined with the solar facilities, mean that by the end of 2017 we will have 80% of the energy needs of all Canberra households met by renewable energy generation. So what this highlights is that we're well and truly on the way to making that shift to a low carbon future. And in doing that, we're also making sure that those companies that are winning the contracts to build these solar and wind facilities are investing in our city. So we've seen, for example, over $1 million worth of investment from one of the companies into a renewable energy research fund. We've seen another company put $7.5 million into the Canberra Institute of Technology to set up a skills training centre for renewable energy skills development. And we've also seen other companies choose to either grow their corporate presence here in Canberra or for the first time open offices here in the ACT. So that's a really important part of the economic opportunity that comes from this transition to a low carbon future as well. So I've talked about two areas where we're focusing on action to drive down greenhouse gas emissions, and that's energy efficiency and renewable energy. The third, though, is about more sustainable patterns of development in our city and about encouraging more people to be able to use public transport for some of their journeys rather than relying on the motor vehicle, because fossil fuel use in cars is one of the key drivers of our own emissions in our city, and it's critical that we address that from an environmental perspective as well as addressing it from an amenity perspective and from a social justice perspective, because we know if you live in a city where you have to own, or your family has to own 2 or 3 or even more cars to get around, if you're a low-income household, that's a very expensive proposition and a very difficult thing to sustain for people on lower incomes. So we need good public transport for environmental, for economic and for social reasons. And part of that response is the Capital Metro Light Rail project. I know that this is a controversial project, but I'm hoping tonight to talk to you a little bit about the bigger picture in which the Capital Metro project sits. And first and foremost, it sits as part of the broader climate change response, the low carbon economy response that I've been outlining to you this evening. But it's also an important response in terms of our city's population growth. So between now and 2050, the number of people in Canberra will increase by a further 220,000 residents over the next 30 years. Now that's about a third or 33% increase on what we see today. Now that's going to happen in my lifetime, it's going to happen in the lifetimes of many people in this room. And where is that growth going to occur? Because all of those people are going to need homes to live in, and they're going to need to be able to move around the city efficiently. What we know from the demographic projections is that most of that growth occurs on the north side of Canberra. It occurs in the Gungahlin district and it occurs in the inner north of Canberra. So when you think about that population growth over the next 35 years, you think about the demand for housing that comes with that population growth, and you think about where we know that growth is occurring and is going to occur, it makes a lot of sense to invest in rapid public transport provision like light rail to service that corridor. And that's exactly what the government is doing. Now we can, as a city, choose to accommodate people in a range of different ways. We can continue to choose to accommodate them in greenfields estates, in new suburban development, but we know there's an enormous environmental impact on doing that. We know that it's increasingly difficult to develop suburban greenfields estates because of the environmental constraints around endangered woodland and grassland ecosystems. And we've seen significant limits on Gungahlin's growth already because of that. Or we can choose to accommodate more people closer to where they will work, where they can draw on existing infrastructure, where their kids will go to school, where they will be able to shop, where they will be able to enjoy cultural facilities. And we know increasingly that that shift is on, not just for lifestyle reasons, but also for economic reasons and affordability reasons. So we need to accommodate that growth. We know that our existing suburban land supply gives us 17 years of land left. That's not going to meet that population growth between now and 2050. So we know that a lot of that population growth will be accommodated in urban redevelopment sites, close to centres and along key public transport corridors. So building the light rail project along the Northbourne Avenue corridor, servicing out to Gungahlin, services that big catchment where a lot of this growth is going to occur between now and 2050. It helps give certainty for investment in redevelopment along the corridor, consistent with our planning controls, so that more people live close to rapid and excellent public transport. And we know that it also helps manage broader congestion. Because business as usual along Northbourne Avenue, with that population growth I've been describing, means a peak hour journey on average of just under an hour for people to travel the 12 kilometres from Gungahlin through to the city. That's the average. So that's not a sustainable outcome. Doing nothing is not a responsible course of action. An investment in a piece of infrastructure that can drive that consolidation of population, manage the congestion issues that we will otherwise face on our roads, which affects everyone, not just people that use public transport. And at the same time, provide people with some choices that allows them to live closer to great services, great facilities, great infrastructure, and in a way that's a much smarter and more sustainable pattern of growth. For me, that's why Capital Metro is a very, very important project. We're well advanced in the delivery of the project right now. We're assessing bidders for the preferred private-public partner that we will enter into an agreement with. And we're looking forward to seeing the really innovative design responses that come from those bidders. I might just close on the issue of affordability, because I know that's a big part of the debate on Capital Metro. What I'd say on that is that the Territory does not. We've heard the cost in the media, and the cost in the business case for Capital Metro, the capital cost, is $783 million. People say, well, that's a lot of money, and it is a lot of money. And why should we do it in a city like Canberra? Well, aside from the reasons I've talked about in terms of population growth, we should also think about these things. First of all, there are lots of cities our size, or smaller, that have comprehensive urban light rail networks. And they are more compact cities as a result, because it's a walkable, livable neighbourhood that people choose to live in. But the other point I'd make about affordability is that we don't sign a cheque for 783 million next year. We don't pay any of the capital construction costs until 2020, and in 2020, when the project is delivered and when it's operational, the Territory makes a regular instalment over a 20-year period. That spreads the benefits and the costs of this infrastructure across generations. And so it's not just the people today who pay for something that will benefit future generations, it's shared across generations. And I think that's a much more equitable response. But the other point I make is that it would be reasonable to say that the regular cost of paying that payment over 20 years is only around 1% of the total ACT government budget. And it's certainly much less than we would be projected to spend in any other circumstances on additional road infrastructure that would otherwise be required if we didn't invest in better public transport. So I think we have to take that long-term view on the issue of cost. But for tonight, I hope I've been able to give you a really quick snapshot of the broader sustainability response that our city is charting, our journey to a more sustainable future, to a more low carbon future, and to a future that is prosperous and is accommodating a growing population. So thanks very much for the opportunity to speak to you tonight, and I'll be really happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Let's take a couple from the audience. Okay, John?
Yes, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Simon. Slade Ridge, of course, advocated light rail a long time ago when it would have been a lot cheaper in terms of pro rail pace. It's good to see that it's coming on board. It absolutely needs to be. You need to take that long-term view that look at the big cities of the world, not that Canberra's in that league yet, of New York, London and so forth. They all couldn't survive without some sort of integrated transport system. We should really be looking at a metro and a tunnel in under the thing. Now, then all the naysayers who don't calculate what the real private cost of accessing the road and the depreciation of all those private cars going up and down. No one ever has done that calculation that I've ever seen. So that should be put into the equation, and then you can say to them, but if we go over to the solar, right, you seem to get yourself into an awful lot of trouble down there with communities who don't want it. And not surprisingly, there are existing rooftops. Why don't we use more of the existing rooftops and the landmass of having solar on top of them and win with them?
Could I just add?
Well, we're certainly, just in response to that comment.
What is the massive efficiency gain of having one big solar plant as opposed to lots of small solar when the feed-in factor is almost zero because it's right on your roof, it feeds straight in?
Sure. Well, we're supporting policies that provide for a mix of renewable energy generation and a mix of scales. So, for example, we've got already 40 megawatts of rooftop solar installed when you add it up across all the rooftops in the ACT. So that's the equivalent of the 3 large solar farms. So I think when you see that, that's a 50-50 mix between small scale and large scale. There are some efficiencies in the delivery of solar large scale. And that's reflected in some of the prices we've been able to achieve, which is certainly much less than the feed-in tariffs that were paid initially for the large scale, for the domestic rooftop solar. We will continue to support medium and rooftop generation in a variety of ways. For example, right now we're running a 1 megawatt feed-in tariff auction process for community-owned solar, where people who can't put solar on their roof, either because they're renting or because their house isn't suitable, or maybe they're in an apartment, are able to buy in to a community-owned solar farm and get a share of the benefits of that generation. And while we haven't seen the final proposals for those for that 1 megawatt community solar farm yet, it's possible that we will see some proposals that are rooftop based, and others which are ground mounted and larger scale field mounted proposals. So I think it's important to stress too that using rooftops is not free. There's a rental in the same way there's a rental if you use someone else's land in a field. So these are matters that solar developers can work out are the most sensible. If someone can make it stack up across 10 or 15,000 roofs, I'd be just as open to that as I would to have seen one.
Just as a quick corollary, a mate of mine who had a house in Harrison, he pointed out his was one of the only houses that actually had rooftop solar. His house was built, half a dozen years ago,
Yeah.
and it was staggering. It was just ludicrous. Why did these big houses on these small blocks, or energy-consuming things, why were they allowed to do that?
Sorry, Dennis?
Yeah, Dennis O'Brien, I'm Chair of Wynnum Community Association. Thanks, Simon. Densification, you mentioned at some length there. One of the concerns that I would have about densification is the encroachment on our open space.
Yeah.
What are you doing to ensure the protection of our open space, which will become far more valuable as these ugly access-type towers skyrocket up? Those people in those lovely towers, the garden owners, as we call them in Wynnum, will need the open space that's somewhere near. Are you going to guarantee open space for these people? And what sort of protections will you put in place to make sure that happens?
Yes, the government does guarantee that, and it does guarantee protections, and those protections are reflected in what's actually in the territory plan. Urban open space is not permitted to be used for development, and this government has a very strong record of not rezoning urban open space. I think the more complex area is where you're talking about other land which is not zoned urban open space, but which is considered to be open space, but perhaps has a much broader zoning. So it might be for community facility, or it might be other community facility is probably the classic example. Now, community facility is not open space, but often that land has been relatively undeveloped. So this is where we have to get into a case-by-case process with local communities and talk through the issues, whilst also keeping our eye on the big picture around how we manage growth and how we make sure we continue to have adequate space available for people. But when it comes to formal urban open space, of which the ACT has a very strong network, it's legislated, it's protected in the territory plan, and certainly this government has never seen any whole-scale rezoning of it.
Thank you.
So, because I'm on the committee. Thank you for that in terms of the urban open space, because it was one of the things that I was also bothered about. However, it does disturb me that you're saying it on a case-by-case basis, where I would probably prefer to see it integrated in the plan going forward. To me, it's rather too ad hoc to just look at it in an ad hoc way. Maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're saying.
Yeah, perhaps if I can clarify, I was referring to a community facility land, not urban open space.
No, sorry.
Yeah. And I think we have to be clear about that, because often in this debate we get into discussions about urban open space which isn't actually zoned as such.
No.
And it can be a whole range of, sometimes it's land that's always meant to have been developed but never has been until quite late in the point. And there are classic examples of that around many suburbs in Canberra, where when the NCDC was planning the city, they left land vacant, but always with the intention that ultimately it would be developed. But because it's been vacant for very long periods of time, sometimes people tend to consider it open space, even though formally it isn't. But coming back to your question, when I say case by case, what I mean by that is having regard to the broader strategic planning objectives for a district or for the city as a whole, and then engaging with the local community on the specific development proposal that is being considered and how that land potentially should be used. And I think that's a sensible thing to do. You've got to go and have the conversation with the community, but it's still very much in the context of that broader strategic planning and district planning level.
And I also may add on to that, I like the whole idea of you looking very carefully at sustainability into the future.
Yeah.
One of the things that I would also like to see happening here, in conjunction with these proposals and policies that you're putting in place, is much tighter building regulations, so that the buildings that are being put on the ground today actually are going to be energy efficient buildings, and I don't really see that in terms of some of the development applications that come past our door and onto our table. I see sometimes when we actually ask specific questions about even not only the building components and building processes, but then the building's up and it's not solar, passive, or active, or whatever the terminology might be. It's not being built, it's not being, the aspect's wrong, and so it's going to use huge amounts of energy in the future. And to me, I would like to see much more attention put into that area in terms of policy that is implementable for future development, both in terms of residential blocks or houses, as well as the big office blocks that go up around the place. To me, it just seems to be throwing the baby out with the bathwater when you don't do this sort of thing.
Well, I agree absolutely. Smart design and good design is critical to the long-term sustainability performance of a dwelling. I guess there's two aspects to that. The first is what is the mandated control around performance, and our mandated controls are quite high. You know, it's a 5-star rating for new dwellings. So that's certainly up there with the standard nationally. The challenge is often the constructability of that, the materials that are used, and the quality of the build. So a building quality issue is just as important as the actual design. And we're very focused as a government on building quality. We're doing a very large reform around the Operation of the Building Act, and for those of you who are engaged with that, please probably familiar with that work. So I won't get into the detail of that, but simply to note that we want to make sure that our Building Act is modernised so that we see good design translated into a good built product that is sustainable, that is durable, that is livable. And we believe that's possible, but we need to completely rewrite the Building Act, and that's exactly what we're doing right now.
Terrific.
Simon, could I just suggest mandating all new buildings have solar power and solar hot water? All new buildings. Sorry? No, that's it.
Yeah, look, people often raise the solar power with me. I don't personally favour it because you can achieve a lot just through energy efficiency in a dwelling, and I would much rather that we make sure we build our dwellings so they don't need to use a lot of energy in the first place, rather than say you must put solar panels on your roof. I'd rather say you must build a dwelling that doesn't have to use a lot of energy, and then solar should be optional. And the other reason I say that is that solar is still relatively expensive. I mean, it's nowhere near what it was even 5 years ago, but you're still talking about maybe $3,500 for an installation, and for many households that's not reasonable.
I'm talking about for new though, so it's part of the new cost.
Even for new, it's still a cost, and I think I would much rather have the focus on the energy efficiency of the dwelling, which I guess is the point being made here, and then as people are able to realise those savings and those benefits, they can go and put solar. And the other enormous shift that's coming with that, of course, is storage. So the capacity to store electricity that you generate and use it when you need it, or sell it at a time when you can get a good price for it. That future is rapidly approaching, and that will completely change the dynamics of solar as well. So we'll see that technological innovation come through, but I think from a government's perspective, yes, we want to support the shift to low carbon energy generation, but we don't necessarily feel that mandating solar on domestic rooftop is the way to achieve it.
Okay, Marcus, Leon, Caroline. Okay, I guess as far as I can remember.
I've got a question about, you mentioned that we're moving towards renewable energy generation, which will largely be electricity. I've actually been in discussions with ACTU recently over the past few months about the future of the gas network in the ACT. Now, I understand the ACT government's a 50% owner of the gas network in the ACT. I'm just wondering, with this move towards renewable energy, either large scale or small scale on rooftops, What do you see happening to the gas network, or do you see a future for the gas network in Canberra? And how do you see that fitting in? Well, do you have an opinion, or does the ACT government have an opinion?
Well, I think what's clear is that there are constraints on gas supply in southeastern Australia due to a very significant increase in export of gas overseas and gas producers choosing to export their gas rather than supplying it to the domestic market. So what that means for all of us who use gas is higher gas prices, and we're starting to see that come through. It's not a regulated market, there's no price control in gas, so basically we have to pay based on supply and demand. Into the future, and I guess into the if you ask me where we're going to be in 2070, 2080, I think gas probably will have been largely replaced by renewable energy. But in the short to medium term, gas will continue to play a role. But I think households will continue to make informed choices about what's the most affordable form of energy for their needs. And if gas prices go up, as they're predicted to do, it is now more affordable to heat your house with an electric space heater than it is with a gas space heater. And I think that trend will continue. So I think people will vote with their feet, and we'll see less gas use in the domestic market here in the ACT, and we'll see more electricity use, which is underpinned by very affordable electricity prices due to increasing uptake of renewable energy generation, because renewable electricity is increasingly competitive with coal or gas-fired electricity generation.
Okay, I just should let people know that we're recording these proceedings, so you don't get surprised later on. We gave Simon a list of about 7 questions a couple of weeks ago and asked him if he could consider them for tonight's meeting. The first of those questions was, how does the government plan to meet its 2012 election commitment of a 10.5% public transport journey to work promotion by 2016? It's a difficult one.
It is a difficult one, and it's probably one of the most challenging ones we've got for our city and our community because of the highly dispersed nature of our population across a very large geographic area compared to our population size. We're continuing though to invest in better bus service provision. We're reworking timetables based on the latest data we're getting through our real-time information system, which we've never had before. So that's allowing us to get better data on where the patronage is, and Shane Rattenbury, as our trams minister, has been announcing changes, adjustments to the network, which will now be occurring frequently every 6 months or so as we respond to that real-time data on where demand is. So we're focusing on improving our demand management and response to that. We're also very focused on making sure that we're looking at how we can improve the operation of the bus network through our transport reform agenda. So you've heard the Chief Minister talking about this. We've commissioned a very large body of work on how we can get action ready to meet people's needs now, because at the moment we have declining mode share. There are a range of responses being considered by the government right now, and there'll be further announcements in the coming months around where we want to go with how Action delivers its services. We're also very focused on allowing people to have multiple modes for their journey, so combining walking and cycling with public transport, and for example making sure that people are able to take their bikes on board for part of their journey is another part of that response. So it is perhaps the most challenging response. Certainly the investment in Cap Metro is going to drive patronage along the Northbourne Avenue corridor, but that's only stage 1 of a potentially broader network, and the bus network will continue to play a critically important role as well.
Sorry, Caroline?
Mine continues on for that. As you said, the bus network is going to continue to have a critically important role. For those of us who live in Arvigungal or in the north, I mean, the tram will only replace basically 200 and 202 buses. all the other buses go off Northbourne. How is it going to be organised so that the time that people take to get from where they live to where they want to go is not significantly increased by having to interchange, and will you be able to keep the bus frequency up in the suburbs?
Well, the dilemma's not interchanging. The dilemma that we have to address is making sure it's a seamless interchange and that there isn't a long wait. So interchanging in and of itself is not the problem. The problem is making sure there's connections that are timely and that people don't have to wait. We have it between now and 2020 to redesign the bus network for the inner north and Gungahlin. So that's the time frame we're looking at for that work, remembering that's when light rail commences in 2020. So we've got 4.5 years to do that work. That work is starting now. We will need to work in particularly very closely with the preferred consortium for the development of Capital Metro and draw on their expertise, because both consortia have significant experience in operating combined bus and rail, both heavy and light rail networks in other cities. So we want to be able to draw on their expertise as part of that design work. But we are doing that design work now, and one of the key performance criteria for the delivery of light rail is the effective integration with the urban bus network that will be the feeder in and out of the light rail line. So, for example, there's already work underway that's identified the need for the new bus station here at Dixon on the old, in the vicinity of the current motor vehicle registry site. That will be an opportunity to make sure that there is strong connection, because our bus services will have to work east-west rather than north-south in the inner north when light rail is developed. So having that bus station there will allow people to be able to interchange efficiently in a very timely way. You've got to remember the frequency on light rail is going to be very high. It's going to be through most of the day at about 5 minutes, so it's going to be a very high frequency. So it's making sure that the connections through to the bus network are competitive and give people choices. So we're doing that design work right now, and we'll need to be engaging with the community, but it is a project that has to be complete by 2020, not one that has to be complete by 2020.
Considering that currently the light rail is planning for an 800 metre, it seems, catchment, and traditionally we've had a 500 metre for the buses. Is 800 metres going to, is that the new public transport standard, or?
No, that's based on our understanding of consumer responses to rail compared to bus. So the experience in other cities, nationally and internationally, is that people are prepared to walk a little bit further to a light rail or a rail station than they are to a bus stop. And this is a very psychological response on the part of people, but it's driven by the permanence of that transport infrastructure. It's a very certain outcome. You walk to the station, you're going to be able to get on a train. Whereas you walk to a bus stop, or have I missed it, how often does it come? All of those variables that dissuade you from perhaps walking further than you can with light rail or heavy rail. So that is the broader parameters that we're looking at, and the change that can be driven by the investment in light rail is encouraging more journeys by walking and indeed by cycling compared to buses.
My name is Jochen Steil from NCCC and Friends of Mantajura. Regarding light rail, I'd like to make 2 observations and then 2 suggestions and see what you think of them. The first is that we in a way have a problem with planning. Public transport corridors should be in before people move to Gungahlin. And in the moment we see the same problem being made in Molonglo. It looks like Los Angeles, not a public transport service new community. The second observation I'd like to make is that the real convincing and the real impact is going to come if that network is spreading across Canberra, like to Tuggeranong and to Belconnen, and that will need, like in many other cases in the world, federal money. And so two suggestions. One is, the big debate at the moment, at least in the Canberra Times, is always about funding. And I think, like has been mentioned before, it's really important to put down the full public and private costs of car transport as a comparison. And the second suggestion is, do you see a chance, after the budget reply speech by Bill Shorten, to actually lock into the federal Labour government with the infrastructure plans that they will be supporting a full integrated network of light rail in Canberra?
Well, thanks for the comments. On your second point first, look, I think there is a good opportunity to be able to demonstrate how effective this infrastructure is once stage 1 is built. And that we know is the experience in other cities. Like in other cities, here in Canberra, it's a very heated debate about whether or not we should build our first stage. But once it is built, Gold Coast, Adelaide, very, very popular. Patronage exceeds projections, people want more. So I think that can be leveraged to try and get support for further extensions over time. What federal Labor will do, I really can't say, and I think it's too early to predict where they're going to go with that. But certainly if there are opportunities, I'll be the first one trying to pursue them. In terms of the costs of private motor vehicle use, you're absolutely right. There are lots of costs that are very difficult to quantify, and which more conventional, and which the cost-benefit analysis modelling that we rely on doesn't fully capture. I always take the view that cost-benefit analysis is a tool, but it doesn't give us the answer. It helps inform our answer. It helps inform our decision, but it isn't the decision maker, because there are broader considerations than solely economic ones when it comes to investment in important infrastructure like this. So I certainly take your point on that.
Hi, good evening. My name is Max Power. I'm a recent arrival in Canberra. I moved into Watson. Simon, thank you very much for your presentation, your comments. I want to focus in on the light rail thing that you discussed quite extensively. One of the queries I have about this is you're comparing different cities who have light rail to Canberra. To me, there's a questionable validity of that, because many, or probably most of the cities who have light rail or tram networks or whatever are high-density cities, and you said yourself just a few minutes ago, ACT Canberra is a dispersed, low-density population, right? So to make this kind of light rail work very cost-effective and work, you're fighting an uphill battle. In light of that, also, if you're looking at the moment at the current public transport network, which is already available and existing in ACT Canberra, which is great to have, but if you look at the usage of it, the usage pattern of it, I don't know the precise figures of it, but you know, how many times do you see half an empty bus going past? Quite frequently. I don't know what precise figures are, but just from a purely coincidental observational point of view, it seems that the public transport bus network at the moment is not terribly well utilised. So you already have an infrastructure system there, X amounts, millions of dollars are spent on that. And now you're thinking about spending another, by your quote, $783 million, provided there aren't any cost overruns. We're saving very good at cost overruns. On a network, when you have a public transport existing network which is not terribly well utilised, now you want to put another public transport system on top of that. What are we talking about?
Well, thanks for the comments. First of all, let me address the issue of cost overrun. Delivery of light rail by a public-private partnership means that we pay a regular availability payment, a regular instalment, every year. And that amount is specified in advance. Now, so the consortium that wins the right to build this project is going to tell us this is what the availability payment looks like each year, and we have a negotiation about that, and we agree on what that figure is each and every year for the next 20 years. Now, if they get their sums wrong, and if they assume that they can build it for 783 million and it ends up costing them 900 million, well, that's their cost blowout, not the taxpayers. Okay? So let's be really clear about that. That's the point of the PPP. It transfers that construction risk to the private sector, not onto the taxpayer's balance sheet. That's exactly why we're doing it. Because yes, if we were saying we're going to build it as a government and just contract it out to somebody and pay for it out of our consolidated revenue, you're right, your criticism would be valid. But I would say to you, it's not, because of the way a public-private partnership works.
So what you're saying is there's an incentive for them to stay on target because they have to put the difference to the bill.
Absolutely.
Right.
So that's the purpose of the PPP. And turning to the issue of the utilisation of the bus network. Yes, we have a real challenge with the utilisation of the bus network. But we also have a challenge with where we're going to accommodate growth in population. And if we continue to disperse further and further out, then we're never going to be a high density city, and we're always going to be a car dependent city. So investing in light rail encourages investment back in close to the corridor in terms of construction and in terms of density. That meets our population growth, but it also improves the viability of public transport. So it's a virtuous circle. So we have to make this investment, and we know that buses do not deliver that urban development outcome.
Okay.
So we are on a journey. That's why I often say we are on a journey. We're on a sustainability journey, and we're trying to change the shape of how the city is growing. And investing in this infrastructure, we know, drives development along the corridor in a way that just running buses up and down the road doesn't. And that's the critical difference.
I'm a greenie. I love to have sustainability and green energy and all those kinds of things. I think they're all wonderful.
Yeah.
But I also have at the back of my mind a niggling doubt. Are we having a bit of wishful thinking here in terms of the general pattern of transport use in ACT Canberra for many decades already has been basically private use and
but why is that?
Not very energy efficient.
But the question about that is why is that?
Yes.
And the answer to that is because we've just built roads. So if we build roads, everyone's going to drive. If we invest, well,
we have to change people's behaviour.
We'll always need roads. Okay, we'll always need roads. But if we say our only infrastructure choices to manage transport demand are roads, then not surprisingly that's what's going to happen.
People not
So
all of a sudden going to jump
investing in public transport, investing in high quality, rideable, affordable, high frequency public transport encourages that shift, and that's fundamental. And that's the experience in Adelaide, that's the experience in the Gold Coast, that's the experience in cities around the world.
And the 200 buses
And it's
down
not wishful,
northbound
it's
are full at present.
evidence-based.
Okay, let's just stick with the Q&A here. We have a question over here now, okay? And then we had one there, and then we had one there.
Okay, my name is Corbell. I'm here for about 17, 18 years in Canberra. And I wanted to go back from Canberra to Brisbane where I started living. But Canberra is such a nice place. Corbell and other people make it very good concert room. As far as I know my statistics, that a lot of people are coming from interstate to live in Canberra. So it's all your case. But I have one thing about the bus transportation. I have been watching and I have seen sometimes the buses are full almost. But in most cases I found that 2-3 people are traveling by bus, not enough people. So is there any possibility to set up a different sort of chain network so we have more passengers, or like from just ideal proposal like in the high time, office time, more buses, in the slow time, less buses, something like that, whether you are thinking about it. Maybe you are doing the research every day. Number 2 is, we are waiting for the light rail. It's a very popular, and I spoke about this light rail even in my country where I know 160 million people in Bangladesh. I refer this bus rail, talking about you and the government, what we are doing here. But my question, as far as I had been to here in 1985, 88 in Sydney, I was a part of a protest against the monorail because the left people, Green, and the protest had a rally there, and I was a part of it. And they are against the monorail because it is a fancy, it doesn't carry the mass people. And finally, they had to shut down. I'm sure this will not happen here. It has a practical approach, as you explained. I've been listening to you for the last 10 years, possibly, different places. But I hope it will have a good impact. We'll do the research as well, come back with the feedback. We are waiting. Number 3, the final one, I don't know whether it relates to you. I have a lot of friends around me, living here, migrated here. The building industry, I found a bit not very good, positive. They don't follow the rules, and there is a very weak monitor on the builders, the registered builder who give the registration to the builders. They are not performing their job properly. I don't know what relationship with the builders and the certifier, because it is my observation from my experience and others' experience that they have a very, very, very weak monitoring on that. And ACT government doesn't have a proper monitoring on the builders and as well as the certifier. That is my experience. You might have a different, but I have a good feedback about the builders.
Yeah.
But like a layman like us, we are not a rich man or we are not a builder, we don't have any experience. But like I have seen a lot of people suffered a lot because they cannot find the builder. They have rich people.
Yeah.
They have a good connections with the high body, bureaucracy, businessman. You know that, how it works. So we are a bit, ideal. We could not, like me, my situation, they have done such a bad job. I was very frustrated. I cannot fight. I cannot go to the court because it costs money. If I go to the court, they will ask money, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. That will bring more stress for me. I think the government is elected government, elected by us. And you are the person who can protect the people's interest. That's my only thing. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your comments. And certainly on the issue of climate certification, we recognise that is a problem. The government has taken steps to suspend certain certifiers who've been caught not doing their job properly, and we've required new development assessment to take place where certifiers have, for example, identified work as exempt from development approval when it wasn't. So we have started to take action in that area, but it comes back to the issue that the lady down here mentioned around building quality and the need to have a stronger building act. And in my answer there, we need stronger laws so that we can enforce accountability on certifiers, and that's why we're rewriting the Building Act at the moment. So I guess the short answer is, yes, I agree, we need to do more work in that area. Strengthening the Building Act is the way to do that, to give government the power it needs to enforce discipline on certifiers who don't do the right thing, and we're right in the middle of doing that.
It is very much, I just mention one thing. The most of the builders, I have no experience of building a house. I don't care about building a house.
Yeah.
I want to live in a small place, hut, so I can enjoy my life. But anyway, I had to build. But it is a terrible. And I have seen the quality of job. These builders, they hire people from interstate or different places. They come and do. They don't know, not even monitor how they are constructing the bricks.
Yeah.
What proportion of cements and the sands are given. They do not even care at all. I have seen many places.
Yeah, there are bad operators out there.
So you are the defender of our interest.
Absolutely. And
I've been getting older now, but I don't know how long I will live. But you defend the people of Canberra. It's a capital. We are proud of Canberra, and Canberra is really, really beautiful city. Beautiful. We have many resources. I have some problem about arthritis, health problem issues.
Yeah.
I don't know that Australia has such resources. Arthritis patients, a lot of it, just you have to get it. You have to go and knock. So I'm very happy, but you people can make this city more livable, and we can feel proud to the whole world that Canberra is a livable city. Thank you.
Okay,
Can I just give an example that goes with that question?
Sorry, no, just because I probably need to take one more question.
Oh.
I've been on my feet an hour. I've been here
Good evening, Simon. Russ is my name from Deep South. I'm really interested to hear your views on public transport. And I'd actually like to answer something Max was talking about a moment ago. The current take-up rate for work purposes of our workers of public transport is somewhere around about 7%, which, by the way, is slightly higher than the average of a lot of American cities, as it turns out. I had a look at something on the web the other day. I'm very pro new and proven transport technology. I also contributed recently to the Combined Community Council Network 14 submission, and one of the things that we suggested was that we, rather than relying on NextBus and MyWay for the source of information, which is only effectively picking up that 7%, we need to actually go and talk to the people who are not using it. And at the moment, I don't see any moves in that department at all to get people on board. Now, I looked at the map that's in the plan to 2031, and I looked at the big gentleman's map that he put out for the light rail service, and I see they're both the same. And I look at the fact that there are 245,000, based on the 2011 census, 245,000 plus, no, it's a bit higher than that actually, workers travelling around Canberra. And my experience working down at Russell, where I've got involved in logistics quite a bit, my feeling is the people, the Canberrans generally have walked away from public transport. They don't really care about it. And the reason is nobody's got in their face about it. And I would very much like to see it, and I'd like to be part of it, to be able to go out to the community group. Now I live in Theodore. There's 15,000 odd cars a day come along Tharwa Drive from Lanyon, plus the people that live in Corbell and Theodore and so heading into the city. We're just not getting into that. I also made a comment here that the government should undertake big spending projects with the wholehearted support of its citizens. As I said a moment ago, we seem to have, Canberrans generally seem to walk away from public transport, and I've been watching all the letters to the editor lately, and there's more people out there saying, hey, we don't want this, at least until we can sit down and talk about it. Now,
we have a question here, right? Yeah. I'm just conscious.
Okay, two questions.
Because I asked here, unfortunately, one person doesn't get to ask a question.
I've got two questions I would very quickly like to ask. One, where does it say in the 2012 election information what the total estimated cost of the network is expected to be? And given that there are many examples in Australia where 12 kilometres is going to cost at least $1 billion plus the infrastructure, and I can think of Sydney at 2.2, 1,600, 1.6 up on the Gold Coast, a similar figure over in Perth. That works out just on the back of a postage stamp, something in the order of about 12 or 15 billion plus. And those that
okay, question. Sorry, I'm just conscious of time.
Okay.
Question. Just a question.
So my question is, where does it say in the election material that is going to cost 12 billion or plus, not 614, because it's never going to be that? Because the public haven't voted for those kind of numbers. So therefore, would you consider a petition?
Okay. The election policy was very clear. The election policy said Labor will develop the first stage of a citywide network. It will be from Gungahlin to the city. It will be delivered by a public-private partnership.
That's not true.
It is true. And the cost is...
$30 million
No.
on research.
Let's be really, really clear. The document is explicit. It says it will be the first stage from Gungahlin to the city. It will be 12 kilometres. It will be delivered by a public-private partnership. And the most available cost estimate at the time, which was referenced in the document, was the $613 million identified in the 2012 report. Now, the cost, of course, is only incurred to the territory budget in 2020 because it's a PPP. You make the payments when the project is complete. And this comes back to the issue of the allegations of cost blowout. As I said to the gentleman earlier, the purpose of a PPP is to transfer risk from the taxpayer to the private sector. We pay a fixed amount each year when it is built and operating, not before.
So what's that?
And what that means is, if the consortium get it wrong, if they say, well, the affordability payment per year is X million, and that's based on their assumption it'll cost them 783 million to build, and they get that wrong, and it ends up costing them $1 billion to build, well, that risk doesn't come back to the taxpayer because we've signed up for a set figure each and every year. So the cost blowout argument doesn't hold water. It just doesn't hold water because it's not a traditional government procurement.
So what's
It's
the
a
figure
public-private
you're
partnership.
going to pay each year? Do you know what it is? Because you've said this figure of whatever.
Yeah.
What is the figure you're going to pay each year? Or you won't know that until 2020?
We won't know that until we see the bids, and the bids come in at the end of this year.
Okay. So that could be...
Okay. The government said very clearly what our affordability bound is. It's in the business case, which we've made fully public. But we want to see what the bidders put forward, and we are not going to put a figure out in advance of a bidding process because it's just going to condition them to bid higher than perhaps we would otherwise want them to. We want value for money for ratepayers, and so we're not going to signal what we're prepared to pay in advance. We want to know how affordable they can deliver this project.
Okay, final question.
Yeah. Where does one start? The Canberra was originally planned, for good reason, to have its community hubs well away from the transport routes. The idea being to keep people's living and their community spaces away from the traffic, the pollution, the noise, the danger. Now, why have you opted for a transport system that is not going to be able to get into those nodes? We're an ageing population and we simply can't walk a kilometre to get to the tram. It's not going to work, and your own Metro's figures say that the population of Canberra, 90% of it won't be able to utilise readily the tram system. And yet my understanding of the way the figures are organised is that everybody's going to pay for it, whether they've got access to it or not. And not very many of us live within a couple of 100 metres of the tram line. Canberra's designed for us not to be 200 metres from the tram line.
So what's the question then?
The question is, why did you opt for a transport system that can't get in to the community hubs when there are transport systems that could do it, but none of them have been looked at, and I've done a lot of research into what was looked at.
All right. Well, I don't agree with the argument, and I'll tell you why. First of all, at a very simplistic level, I'd have to say to you, well, Civic's the biggest community hub we've got, and this train is going straight into the middle of it.
Sure.
Okay, so let's be clear about that. But I dispute your assertion that Canberra wasn't planned for this. Go back to Griffin's original plans and hear me out. You've asked the question. Go back to Griffin's original plans. Now, he designed a much smaller city than what we are today, but the part of the city where we're building this light rail network, this light rail line, is part of the original Griffin plan, at least out to about here, not further out to Corbell. He designed a city and wanted a city built where people lived close to the transit corridors, and where there was a mixture of commercial and retail and residential activity. It was only in the 1950s that we decided to adopt different planning philosophies, where all uses were heavily segregated from each other, and the only way to connect them up was lots of freeways. So that's the city we built in the 50s and 60s, but it's not the original Canberra. There is a reason why that median strip in Northbourne Avenue and all the other main avenues is so wide. And it's not for just for grass and trees.
No, I agree.
It's for transit. That's why it's built to that corridor, and that's why the planners past of our city had the foresight to still incorporate those avenues. Yes, they're graceful, yes, they're aesthetically pleasing, but they also have a very important purpose. So that is, we're choosing to utilise those corridors now. And our city is polycentric. We have multiple centres, the town centres, the district centres like Dixon, Jamison and Arundel and so on. And we have the local centres. So we have this beautiful hierarchy of centres and activities. And what we want to do, and all of our transport planning, going right back to the NCDC and before, has always assumed that the high frequency corridors will be the corridors that link the town centres together. And what we are building now, Weir Capital Metro, is a piece of infrastructure that delivers a level of frequency and reliability that's never been delivered before between two of our fastest growing centres, and to lay the foundation of a broader expansion across to connect the other big centres, the other big town centres.
Yeah.
So I would simply say to you, it's exactly what's always been envisaged, and we're starting here, but we're starting.
Yeah,
And it's not finished, but we're starting.
We can't, people that live in Ainsley, O'Connor, Lynham, Watson are not going to be able to use the tram, they're too far away. And it's fine for the planner back in the 1920s to say this was the way to fly, but it's not the 1920s, it's 2015, and there must be other ways of doing it that service them too.
All I say to you is, remember what I said at the beginning, which is that we've got population growth coming towards us, and we're going to need to be living in denser urban environments. We need smart growth. We're not all going to keep sprawling out. We're not all going to keep sprawling out into the suburbs.
We'll stop growing the city and build another one 200 miles away.
Okay, well, tell all your kids and grandkids not to have kids, okay?
Okay, everyone.
Don't worry.
Okay, I assume that's all the questions that,
I think that's very
okay, well, everyone, let me thank Simon for his time. Thanks a lot for that. I always like frank, robust discussion at meetings. Okay, well, yeah, thanks a lot for that.
everybody.
Okay.